Welcome to another video by AskMath.com. Let's read the directions to this problem. Graph the system of inequalities, given y is greater than 2 and y is less than or equal to negative 3x plus 1. Remember, a system of inequalities just means that you have two or more system of inequalities. It's these little inequality symbols here. So if they were equal signs, they'd be equations, but they're inequality symbols, so they're inequalities. So we have a system of inequalities. To graph it, remember that we learned y equals mx plus b for equations, and the same format can be applied to inequalities. We'll see what the difference is. Instead of an equal sign, we'll have inequality symbols. Remember that we call this form SlopeIntercept form, where the slope is whatever the number multiplied by x is, m, and the intercept is whatever value this b is, including the sign, goes with the term to the right, remember, intercept. Now specifically, this is the y-intercept, and not part of the name, but that's what it is. It's the y-intercept. Now, we actually are going to use these in reverse order, remember. This is the first thing that we look at when we're graphing, and this is the second thing that we look at when we're graphing. So let's make our graph. And let's copy over our first inequality. Now, I've left a space here, and the reason is, where are my x's? There aren't any x's. Well, when there aren't any x's, that means that there are 0 x's, and that's what this is, 0x. 0 times anything is 0, and then you don't have to write it. But when we're graphing, we want to remind ourselves what number that actually is, so let's write it 0x. Now, when you just had the 2 there all by itself, you don't have to have the sign, but when you have terms to the left of it, you have to put the sign so you remember what math that is happening. Okay, then we also need to remember that slope is made out of a rise divided by a run. It's always a fraction. And to make this value here, this m, a fraction, just divide by 1. 0 divided by 1 is still just 0, so we haven't changed anything. Okay, we're going to first look at our y-intercept, and that's this number here. And starting from the origin, that means go up 2. Positive means up, negative means down. Okay, and then you draw a dot. Now, we didn't go, so that's the y-intercept because it's the y-axis. We didn't go to the left or to the right at all, which means that we went 0 in the x direction, and that's the first coordinate of this point, is 0 for the x, not left or right, and positive 2 for the y. We went up 2 from the origin. Starting there, we're going to follow this rise over run, and remember that when the rise is positive, it means up. If it's negative, it means down. When run is positive, it means right. When run is negative, it means left. 0 is neither positive nor negative. That means that we don't move at all up or down. So starting at our y-intercept that we've graphed, we don't move up or down at all. We do move to the right 1 because it's a positive 1. And so we're going to move to the right 1 and draw a dot. Okay, I'm just going to remind myself that's that point, and this point here is, okay, so this is an x value of 1, and this is a y value of 2. Okay, so connect those two dots. The line. Now here's the difference between an equation and an inequality. This does not say greater than or equal to, it just says greater than. When it doesn't say or equal to with that extra equal, we don't graph a solid line like I just have, like we would with an equation. And so if I had an eraser, I would just erase little chunks out of this to make this a dashed line. And what I'm going to do, because I'm using a marker, is I'm just going to correct this by showing that this is a dashed line. And the way that I remember it is that if I see a little solid line drawn under this inequality like this one has over here, then I would go ahead and make this a solid line. But when there isn't that solid line under the inequality symbol, it's a dashed line. So you're missing something there, you're missing parts of the line here. Okay, the last difference, so that's one difference between an inequality symbol and an equation. The other difference is that we need to do some shading. So this says y is greater than, and when you say y is greater, it means above, shade above. So what we're going to do is shade above this line. If the inequality symbol were flipped and you read y is less than, you would shade below the line. All right, on to the next inequality. Y is less than or equal to negative 3x plus 1. Okay, we're going to turn our slope into a fraction, just so we're all set there. Start with the y-intercept, positive 1. From the origin, up 1. Coordinates of that point, we haven't moved in the x direction at all, so it's 0, comma, positive 1. And then from that point, we're going to follow the slope. And the slope says negative 3, that's down 3, 1, 2, 3. Don't draw a point yet. And then finish it by going to the right 1. So we've started at our y-intercept and we've gone down 3, that's negative 3, right 1, that's positive 1, dot. Okay, now let's write the coordinates of that point. Let's write the coordinates. Just start at the origin. We need an x value. How many to the right or left? It's 1 to the right. How many up or down? It's 2 down. Those are the coordinates of that point. We do have an equal sign under this inequality symbol, which means that this is a solid line. So this one is going to remain a solid line, not be dashed. And this says y is less than or equal to this stuff, and less than means down, shade below. I should say below. Okay. Now there's a part of this graph, and this isn't part of the, so we've actually finished the instructions to this problem, but to point out, the solution to a system of inequalities is where the shading of the two overlap. So here you see shading above this line, but we don't have the shading from this line, and here, down here, we have shading below this line, but we don't have the shading above this line. In this part here, there's overlap. We have shading from both. That's where the solution of a system of inequalities is. Any point in that shaded area is part of the solution. Also, any solid line is part of the solution. Now, it doesn't continue down here because remember, this solid part of the solid line is not also part of the solution of this first inequality that we drew, which is shaded above. So it's just this part of the solid line. It is not the dashed line. A dashed line, any point on that dashed line is not part of the solution. Any point on this solid line is part of the solution, or in the shaded area where they overlap. Okay, that is the end of this problem. Thanks for watching another video by AskMath.com.